I've known Gary, I guess, well over 50 years. Yes? We were casual friends for a few years, and then as teenagers we became very, very best of friends. And the different transitions that we passed through together very much molded our lives. We demonstrated against the Vietnam War. We were very sympathetic toward the civil rights movement. We merged into the counterculture of America, where there was all sorts of various theologies, philosophies, ideologies, and experiential movements to try to find deeper meaning, enlightenment, and to make sense out of what the world was doing at the time. After all, when we were just beginning our teens, President Kennedy was shot and killed, and the Vietnam War started raging. A few years later, Martin Luther King was shot and killed. Then for the young generation, Robert Kennedy was the only politician left who meant anything to us. He was shot and killed. And I just was in a peaceful demonstration in Grant Park in Chicago, just questioning the relevance of this war that I was about to possibly get drafted into, and was tear-gassed and beaten by the clubs. Well, I wasn't actually beaten, but I was a fast runner. But I was tear-gassed by club-swinging police, who I was told were protecting my freedom. So Gary and I, we were looking for something meaningful and fulfilling. I remember hearing a statement by a great man that if one does not have an ideology that one is willing to die for, one really doesn't have anything very meaningful to live for. And we wanted to find that ideology, that ideal that we could die for and live for. We came to California during a summer vacation in high school, and we hitchhiked up and down the coast to some extent. We were sleeping on the sand in Laguna Beach until we were told that police were arresting everyone. So we were living a very simple life. Seeking. We went to the Bahamas once. We went to high school together, college together. Then one day, I was in New York City, and Gary called me on the phone and said, I have something I have to talk to you about. Come immediately to Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So I was a hitchhiker in those days. By the way, I hitchhiked here, but there's different ways of hitchhiking this time. These days I hitchhike by borrowing somebody's car and driving myself. But in those days we went like this, and whoever picked us up, we were at their mercy. So I went to Cherry Hill, and Gary said, Frank and myself are going to Europe for a summer vacation. You must come. I said, I have no money, and I have a job this summer in northern Illinois. I have to work and then go back to college. Gary said, well, I don't have any money either, but Frank is sponsoring both of us because he wants to go so bad that he's willing to sponsor both of us. I was convinced that God wanted me to go to Europe that summer. So we took I think it was $65, yes?
Something like that.
On Icelandic Airlines.
Mm-hmm.
We went to Iceland, and then onward to Luxembourg. And Frank was going to sponsor us, but it wasn't going to be very luxurious, because our first night in Luxembourg And we woke up in the morning. It was a camping ground. And Frank came out of the tent so angry and despondent. As a Swami, I cannot repeat the words he was shouting, but they were coming from his heart. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I've been robbed. All the money is gone. We have to all go back. We have our tickets back to New York. We should go back." He slung his backpack over his shoulder and said, "Come on." And Gary and I just stood there looking at each other. And he turned back. And we said, "Frank, we'll see you sometime later." And I remember I sat on the bank of this little creek and looked at the water. And I saw how the current was flowing according to a very natural course. And I remember thinking then, I'm completely free, like this water. I'm just going to flow according to destiny and God's will. I can't make any plans for myself because I don't know anybody except Gary. And I had no money. We had little, very small. We started to travel around. And at the beginning, Gary and I were very much into the counterculture scene in Amsterdam, at the Isle of Wight Rock Festival, in London. But something was happening to me. I remember at the Isle of Wight, it was the largest rock festival of our generation. Much bigger than Woodstock, as far as the amount of people and the bands that were playing there. And I remember we were pretty close to the stage. And Jimi Hendrix was performing. That music coming out of those amplifiers was so loud. It seemed to be shaking the mountains, stirring the sea, and scattering the clouds. There was a voice in my heart, a silent voice that seemed louder than all the music, that was calling me away from it all. What I felt I fit in so nicely, the counterculture, what I gave up my parents' lifestyle and accepted all kinds of mistreatment. Because in those days, if you had long hair, it was not a style. It was a radical political statement against the government and the establishment. And people didn't like that. And I was thinking that through this counterculture, we're going to bring peace into the world through love and through music. I started to see the same things that we were revolting against in the establishment were very much present within the counterculture, just in a different dress, with a different hairstyle, and with different words. Selfishness, egotism, prejudices. I didn't know where I fit in. I loved it, but something was calling me away from it all. Just about a week or so later, Gary and I were in Surbiton, a suburb of London. And can you tell them, Gary?
When we heard Jimi Hendrix had died.
Sit here.
Oh, gosh.
We'll speak to you.
Oh. Okay. What would you like me to tell them, Maharaj?
Yeah, well, tell them a little about Surbiton.
Well, like Radhanath had said, we hitchhiked at the Isle of Wight. We hitchhiked wherever fate took us, and we met some, getting into the details, you know what I'm talking about. all of a sudden we heard this terrible news that Jimi Hendrix had died of a drug overdose. And he had been one of our generation's idols. I mean, he stood for everything that, that we wanted to stand for, and he was a great musician, a great guitar player, and he died of a drug overdose. And it was then that we began wondering, maybe the counterculture, as he's calling it, is maybe something's wrong there too. Maybe drugs and free love and partying and music and rock music and all that isn't the answer. And so
Thank you.
You could take it from here. I don't know.
So we started going to museums, studying art, trying to find spiritual symbolism to it. And I would go astray from Gary quite a bit. Just alone to cathedrals and monasteries and synagogues, just to find some solace and meditation and meet people. And at one point, we were in Athens, Greece. And there, it was a different scenario than the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe, we just hitchhiked, and wherever the ride took us, we went there. In Athens, there was police on the streets patrolling with machine guns. And there was very strict vagrancy laws. So we couldn't just sleep in a park or under a tree, and there were no crash pads there. There was a hostel, a youth hostel, but it cost money. And we had absolutely nothing. So at that time, we resorted to a traditional method of economics according to the counterculture of world travelers at the time. And Gary will tell you that story.
I didn't realize I was going to be up here, but I'll do the best I can, because whatever Radhanath wants is what I want. We sold blood. You get paid to sell blood. Even though we'd heard ghastly stories of how they would take long-haired guys like us and take all the blood out of you and then throw your body into the sea, we sold our blood nevertheless, because, like Radhanath said, we had to find a way to get into the youth hostel. And should I tell about the band? And
Tell about how painful the process is.
oh, the needles. Oh. The needles were thick and fat and
They just had
uncomfortable.
syringes. They went really painful.
Wow.
Go on.
And I remember laying there looking at Radhanath and thinking, how did it end up? We come from such good homes, and how did we ever end up on this dirty cot in this medical clinic in Athens selling our blood to get enough to eat and spend for the night? I remember thinking, thank God my mother can't see me. Anyways, it was a terrible experience. The needles were thick and they were painful.
What?
And but we did get paid for it, and you get a glass of orange juice at the end, and that's something. We had to find another way to make money, which we did, and Radhanath will tell you, unless you'd like me to tell.
What's wrong, Gary? Come on now.
Well, I'll say a few words and then give it back to Gary.
You didn't tell me I was going to help him tonight, but it's an honor.
Actually, I'm helping you. They made you wait half hour before they gave you any money, because so many people would fall unconscious when they go outside in the streets, because it was really a painful ordeal the way they did it in those days. So while we were waiting, we got a little glass of orange juice, and Gary was, there must be a better way. And I was also thinking like that. And there was a Swiss boy with a violin case who was like this. They had long hair, counterculture kind of person. And then there was a French guy, same looking. He had a guitar case. And he was like this, drinking orange juice. And we all looked at each other and decided, let us start a band.
And Radhanath, what he didn't tell you was he was a great harmonica player. He had studied the blues harp from some of the best harmonica players at the time.
Well, I wasn't very good. He loves me, so he says like this.
Actually, he's being modest here, but he was a very talented musician, a blues harpist. And these two guys, one guy had been trained in classical violin, the other guy was a very good guitar player, and I was really good at passing around a hat. So we thought an idea came that we would make music together. And we would walk around Athens at the outdoor cafes making music, and people loved us. They were rocking out to our music, and they were filling the hat with money. And we were living really, really, by our standards, we were living
we got
really.
a bunk bed in the hostel. For us, that was 5-star.
And food, all the food we needed. I mean, we were just, thought maybe I could retire on that situation. But those police that Radhanath had mentioned that looked like stormtroopers that were patrolling the streets of Athens at the time, they found us one day, and they came and they arrested us. They put us in jail and said, this is illegal here. They took all of our money and said, if we catch you doing this again, we're locking you up and throwing away the key. And that was the end of our music career in Athens. But it was great while it lasted. And we didn't have to give blood. So it was a wonderful gig. And they loved his harmonica. One side, I'll tell you a little story. When he was coming on the plane over to meet me, he sat next to a rock idol of our time named Johnny Winters. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember. And the plane was delayed, and the woman sitting next to Radhanath, at the time his hair was down to his belt. She just didn't want to sit next to a disgusting creature like him. And she went to they looked at us pretty disgusting. I had a big beard and long hair. You can see pictures in the book of us. And somehow she had convinced the flight attendant to put her in somewhere else and put another long-haired guy next to Radhanath, who turned out to be Johnny Winters. And Johnny Winters saw Radhanath's harmonica in his little harmonica case and said, you play harmonica and the blues harp? And make a long story short, they had a rock concert. They had an impromptu jam session on that airplane. So he has played with some of the top musicians in the world. He's being very modest. He was very, very talented.
Remember we came off together?
Yeah,
Johnny Winter had a beautiful Danish model waiting for him. And I had Gary. And Gary was really impressed when I was coming off like arm in arm with Johnny Winter, and Johnny embraced his model and I embraced Gary.
His model's long gone, but you still got me.
You are a model. So then I remember Gary said to me, don't you wish she was with you instead of me? And don't you wish she was waiting for you instead of me? I said, well, we're going on a spiritual quest. I think I'll be less distracted with you. What Gary didn't say is we did hide some of that money, was drachmas is the name of the currency, from the police. And we had enough to take a ferry to the Isle of Crete. And there we wanted to just completely absorb ourselves in our spiritual quest. In Italy, we were really spiritually absorbed. And then we went to Greece. And on the Isle of Crete, we found a cave we lived in on the southern coast, top of mountain and meditate and pray and read spiritual books from sunrise to sunset. And Gary did something similar on the seashore every day. And after sunset, we'd meet back at the cave and we'd share our hearts. What was our realizations? What are we thinking? It was the most beautiful relationship of soul brothers sharing our spiritual experiences. And at that time, Gary and I, we were best friends for many years. But the way we were traveling together, going from place to place, meeting all different people, we became so close because we shared such a common goal and we were always unconditionally there for each other without judgment. Because in many ways we were very different, but we had such a connection of non-judgmental concern for each other. So when we would share our hearts in that cave, it was something very deep, our conversations. But one day on the top of that mountain, that spark of spiritual aspiration that was in my heart, it had become a burning, all-consuming fire. And there was just nothing else I wanted except to find a path to enlightenment, to connect to God. I came to the conclusion on that mountain, actually even before I came to that mountain, but it was burning hot, that unless I find a spiritual meaning and connection in my life, then nothing else is really very important. And I was crying that day and praying for direction. And the sun began to set. Most beautiful sunset I had ever seen. There was lilac and pink and orange colors painting the sky, painting the clouds, dancing on the waves of the Mediterranean Sea. I was in awe. And at that moment, I heard a voice. It was a silent voice, but it was louder than anything I ever heard in my life. It spoke 3 words. Those 3 words changed my life forever. To go to India. I never met an Indian in my life. Never had Indian food. Didn't even have a map. And at that time we had no money. But I was determined to go. And I was hoping Gary would go with me. But I didn't. I had my doubts. I went down to the cave. Gary was sitting in meditation with a little candle. By this time it was dark out. I said, Gary, something amazing happened to me. Gary said, something amazing happened to me. I said, what? He said, at sunset I heard a voice. I said, really? What did he say? He said, you won't believe me. I said, I might. Just tell me. I sat really close. He said, I heard the words, go to Israel. I said, what? Where? I said, I told you wouldn't believe me. I said, no, I believe you, but where? Where? I didn't hear you. He said, where? He said, Israel. He told me to go to India. India? Gary yelled. Yeah. There was complete silence for about 20 minutes as we both looked out in the stars over the Mediterranean Sea. And I remember just whispering He was really worried about me. Hitchhiking through the Middle East and the deserts is not like hitchhiking through Europe. It's very dangerous. Let's go to Israel together and work on a kibbutz, and then we'll make some money and we'll take a bus and I'll go to India with you. But I told Gary, I believe this is a calling of God. And I have to respond. I'm leaving in the morning. And I remember a tear came from Gary's eye and streamed down his long brown beard. And he told me he would pray for me. And he said, yes, you must follow your heart. You can tell what happened after.
Well, I tried to convince him not to. I was concerned because, like he said, we had no money. And between Europe and India is the whole Middle East. I just couldn't imagine how he was going to get there. You know, I don't even know if he had $10 in his pocket. Perhaps not, you know. To go through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, over the Khyber Pass into India. We'd heard stories about how dangerous it could be for a young Jewish American guy to be traveling through the Middle East, you know. But he was determined. I tried to talk him out of it, but he had already made up his mind. He was going no matter what. He knew if he kept going east, he might, you know, with God's will, he'll get there. And I realized at some point there was no, there was no convincing him to come with me to Israel. So at that point, I gave him my love and blessings, and you know, I worried about him for until I met him again, which is another story. But this was before the days of cell phones and computers and internet connections. You could lose somebody back then. You know, now it's pretty hard to lose somebody unless you want to. And you know, so sure enough, at sunrise the next day, we climbed down out of our little cave, and we went to this tiny little, you can call it a bus stop, you know, where the peasants get on the bus, and it takes you to the port. And I couldn't believe that he was leaving, you know, because we'd been together since we were 10 years old, you know. We'd been together through everything, trials and tribulations. This was going to be the first time in my adult life that Radhanath and I were actually, you know, parting paths in the middle of, you know, in this Greek island in Crete, and I didn't know when I'd ever see him again. I was really, really kind of very freaked out, very scared, very concerned. But you know, I only hope that since God spoke to him, he would watch over him. And I remember he was about to leave, and he wanted to give me something, but we had no possessions. The only thing he had of value was this vest that he used to wear. He started wearing this vest as long as I'd known him, just about. He wore that vest every day. It might not seem like much to you, but when you only own like one shirt and one pair of pants and one pair of shoes and one vest, every piece of clothing counts, you know. And he took off his vest, you know, and he never took that vest off for anybody. He took the vest off and gave it to me, you know. That meant a lot to me. And got on that bus and left. I was just in the middle of the road crying like a baby, and man, it was a long time ago, but it seems like just yesterday talking about it. And that was the last I saw of him for a long time. I did go to Israel. They have a law that if you're of Jewish ancestry and you're not a criminal, they have to let you in, even if you're broke. And they have to find you a place to live, and they have to find you a job. So, and plus it's the Holy Land. I mean, if you're on a spiritual quest, you know, Israel is the spiritual center for Jews and Muslims and Christians. And so I thought, what a great place to go. I thought that's what God was said to him until he told me to go to India. But that was the last I saw of him for a long, long time. At least that's my recollection of how it all happened.
When I gave him my vest, I had vested interest. And that was the most dear thing in my heart I was giving to my best friend. Because it was actually my identity. That vest became like an inseparable part of my identity because I wore it every day for so many years. And I was kind of giving him myself in that form. The journey home talks about my hitchhiking through the Middle East. Sometimes I traveled with a couple of other people, sometimes alone, through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. From the point I came to Istanbul, it took 3 months to reach the border of India. And many life-changing experiences took place in the Middle East. It was like nothing. Every day was severe culture shocks. When you're kind of alone and you don't have anything, you're really exposed to everything good and everything bad and everything else. But it was a growing experience because I was coming to the conclusion that I was not in control. There was so many things so out of control of me that I really had to turn to a higher power than myself. And I believed that that was the power of God. And that was something very, very beautiful. To feel that connection, to me at that time, was of greater value than all the money in the world. Because I was coming to the realization that inner fulfillment and inner meaning was what brought real happiness, not things. Somehow, after 3 months of hitchhiking through the Middle East, I made it to India. I crossed over the border. And I remember I was walking at night, the first night I came into India, through an agricultural field. I was all alone. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have anything. I was just walking through fields. And I felt so at home. Then I came to a little road. And I flagged a car down that was driving by. And he took me to a railway station and said he was going to take me on a train to Delhi. And I was thinking, after 6 months from London to this place, I've been hitchhiking and getting rides in the back of trucks and in the back of camels and in overcrowded ferries. I've never had a seat on a train. This is really going to be such a relaxing experience. And I have a host who's going to bring me on the train with him. Do you want to hear this story?
Yes.
We got to the railway station. My first day in India, my first night in India. And that railway station was crowded with people. There were people cooking all kinds of stuff on these little carts, and they were selling everything. There were beggars of all sorts, trying to get donations. Color, spit all over the platform. I'm not going to go into details. And there were people having picnics with their families, and other people were sleeping just on the cement. And there was a crackling sound on on this PA system announcing the train was arriving, and a big steam engine came in with smoke puffing out of the chimney, whistle blowing, and it was going pretty fast, quite fast. It was coming into the station, passing through, and I saw everybody in the railway platform jump up and start running as fast as they could. And my host, who was supposed to be giving me a relaxing, luxurious trip to Delhi, he said, "Run, run, come, follow me." I didn't know what was happening. I started running, and he was really fast, and I was running, and everybody, there was about 150 people running. And then I saw when the train was still fast, but slowed down to the extent that you could jump in, everybody was throwing their suitcases in a window and then diving into the window after it. And I was thinking, this is really dangerous. What are they doing? And then my host, he threw his briefcase and jumped through a window and crawled in as the train is going quite fast. And he said, "Come now, fast, get in." I thought, this really looks dangerous, but everyone else is doing it. So I said a little prayer, and it was not a ritualistic prayer. It was pretty serious. And I jumped into a window, and I grabbed on to the bottom of the window, and I couldn't get in. And I was hanging, and I was falling, and the train was moving, and I looked down, and there were those big, giant steel wheels going. And whatever strength I had, I pulled myself because I didn't know how to do it. All those other people, they were trained for years. And somehow or other, I squeezed in, and as I was halfway in, it was so crowded in that train, people started pushing me out. And I was like one hand doing and fighting them, and somehow or other I got in. And I was exhausted. And as soon as I came in, I saw every window. There was one after another, people jumping through a moving train. And by the time the train stopped, it was so absolutely jammed-packed. I think it said maximum capacity. It was painted 60 people. No exaggeration. There was between 200 and 300 people in that train. They were just crowded and crushed in the aisleways. There was one bathroom. I don't want to get into too much detail, but the bathroom was just a little room with a hole in the floor. And you see the tracks underneath you. You remember, Shamsunder? And whatever, you did just went on the tracks. But the problem is, whoever was riding on these trains, they definitely never took target practice. It was all over the place. And people were in there crowded in because there was no place anywhere else. And if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to kick them out. And they waited, and then they went back in. It was a culture shock. And it was so crowded. It was like this. And there was steel baggage racks, you remember? Just some steel bars across near the ceiling. And I saw there were people squeezed into the baggage racks just to find a place to fit. And I was being jostled around. It was so crowded and very difficult. I saw about a 3-foot space in the baggage rack, and I crawled up there and curled into it and looked down at the sprawling mass of people. And I was thinking, I have the penthouse suite. I'm really traveling in luxury today. I have a little baggage rack. And I remember one time I was riding, this is the way I traveled in India on these third-class trains. One time, it was such a long where I was going, and it was so crowded, and I was so tired, I just wanted to lay down, but everybody's standing because there's no space anywhere, and I saw a little bit of space underneath a seat. Now, these seats were just wooden benches, and the floor was as grimy and dirty as you could imagine. And it took me about 10 minutes to get through the crowds to crawl under this seat. And a family on top were like kicking their feet, just like kicking their feet back and forth, and it was coming into my face and kicking my body. And then they started eating peanuts. And I love peanuts. But what they would do is they had peanuts in shells, and I was starving. I had no food for a couple days. I was on these trains, and I was laying there curled up, and they would take the shell off the peanut and throw it down, and all of the peanuts would come in the shells. I didn't get a single peanut. I was just getting the shells. And the whole family was on this bench together. Then the way they were eating the peanuts, they'd go like this to that little skin and blow it. And the skins were all coming out. Shells and skins, and I was breathing, and the skins were coming in. And I was laying there like this. And I can tell you, I was thinking, this is luxury. That I'm actually laying down. And I remember thinking, and I'm telling you from my heart, this was honest. I remember thinking there, I am more satisfied today in this little situation than I used to be with Gary when we were staying in his Aunt Shelley and Uncle Don's house in Beverly Hills. Because everything is according to our perception. According to the need, we really appreciate something. Just a place to lay down. I was so grateful. I was so happy. It was so luxurious. I know I was appreciating more than people in their big mansions. That was a good instruction. So I went to the Himalayas and lived in jungles and met with different rishis and sages and yogis and lamas. I traveled to many places in the Himalayas. Then I came down to the plains where I stayed in Bodh Gaya and studied Buddhism, the place where Buddha attained enlightenment. Under the Bodhi tree I used to sit and meditate. And I went to Varanasi, one of the holy places, and I remember I sat for many days from sunrise to sunset watching bodies burning at the ghats where the cremation pits were to try to understand what is death, because I was told by different holy men that when you understand death, you really can understand life. So I was really an experimentalist in spiritual ways. And one yogi I lived with in the Himalayas, he taught me how to find edible herbs and leaves, and he taught me how to live in the jungle with nothing. Different medicinal herbs that were growing freely. And he taught me how to live with wild animals. Because in the jungles of Himalayas, there was leopards, there was elephants, wild elephants, there was panthers, wild boars, a lot of snakes, pythons, cobras, vipers, scorpions, mosquitoes. And I didn't have a tent, or we were just sleeping on the ground in caves or under trees or on riverbanks. And he taught me something very special, how to live in the jungle with your neighbors. Because where he was taking me, there was no other humans. He said, if you honor and respect them, if you feel that because you're a human, you're superior to them, then they're going to get you. And you have no defense against them. He didn't have any guns or nothing. And if you recognize that these animals and these snakes and all of the others and reptiles, that this is their home and you're their guest, give them their space. They will give you your space, because they could sense. They could sense your fear. They could sense your ego. And if you love them, they'll respect you. I remember when he was teaching me this, it wasn't like you're reading it in a textbook, at home or in a classroom, because we were right there. I had to apply it immediately. But it was so beautiful. And then he taught me something else. How to beg with dignity and integrity, so that people will respect you and honor you as a beggar and not think you were a useless parasite. When we came into villages. And then he told me something else, which he said was more difficult than dealing with the animals. How to deal with other sects of wandering sadhus. You really have to understand how to deal with them and respect them according to their faith, according to their traditions, according to their natures. He taught me so much. And I remember thinking that I'm learning more practical knowledge that's really changing my life than I did through all the years I was in school. This was my feeling at the time. But I want to tell you this, my brothers and sisters, which is really extraordinary. He did not speak a word of English, and I did not speak any Hindi. All of his lessons were through motions of the hands, raising of the eyebrows, pointing to things, glances. Somehow or other, he could communicate so much knowledge and wisdom to me, because he really loved me like a son and really wanted to teach me, and I really honored him like a father. And where there's that connection, the transmission of knowledge could happen even without the use of language. He was a very supernatural person. And in our travels I learned that he had all these powers, but he would never show them to anyone. He just lived alone, traveling in the jungles. Anyways, I moved on. And eventually, after about a year, I was in Nepal. I was living in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in a village called Swayambhunath. Have any of you ever been there? There's a monkey temple, it's called, on a hill. And in those days, I haven't been back there in a long time. It may be a city by now, the way the world changes. But in those days, around that monkey temple on the mountain was nothing but rice paddies, as far as the eyes could see. So one day, I just decided to take a walk. For no reason at all. I was studying with lamas and monks, and I was meditating. And one day, after some time, I'm just going to walk. So I walked 2 hours. And I started walking back. I think I was sleeping under a tree next to a monastery. And I was walking back, and I saw clouds forming in the sky. It was the monsoon season. They were dark clouds. And I could understand there was going to be a torrential storm in a matter of minutes. There was thunder. And lightning was streaking in those black clouds. As far as the eyes could see. It started drizzling. And I only had one set of clothes like this that one sadhu gave me the first day I was in the Himalayas. They were just like this, but white. But without t-shirts. And I was thinking, I don't want to get all wet now because, being just walking around in a monsoon storm is really, really a difficulty. I was looking for a tree. There were no trees. I was looking for some shelter. There was no shelter. But I saw what appeared to be a little man walking with an umbrella, maybe about 50 or 100 yards in front of me. And I thought, I'm going to get under that umbrella, because we were the only two human beings in that entire rice paddy. From horizon to horizon, I didn't see anyone else. How many of you have been to rice paddies? There's just a little ridge about this wide that borders the paddies. And inside the ridge is the big square rice paddy, and in the monsoons, it's about this thick of mud. Mm-hmm. That's where the rice grows from. So I was running on this little ridge to try to catch up, and I was almost slipping into the mud. And finally, I caught up to this person, and I snuggled right behind him. And we were walking. And because the nature of that little ridge, he couldn't really turn around so much, and I was right behind this person, and he just kept walking. He never turned around. He just kept walking. And I was right up to him, under the umbrella, in the pouring rain. And I guess about 15 minutes, 20 minutes passed. And then the rain subsided. And I was going the wrong direction. And I thanked him. And that person turned around. The man was shocked. He dropped his umbrella into the mud and looked at me. And I looked at him. And I cried out, "Gary!"
Oh, no way.
He cried out my name. Together again. Under the most mystical arrangement. We shook hands, we embraced, we were absolutely shocked. We couldn't speak for a few minutes. We just looked at each other like, how is this possible? I remember after Gary cried out my name, in those days it was monk, which is actually the English translation of Swami. But we didn't know that then. Monk, Gary! And then there was silence. And then Gary, from what I remember, his words were, "No one will ever believe this." No, you can speak.
He pretty much said it all. I mean, what are the chances of two American kids from a suburb of Chicago, two Jewish guys from the suburbs of Chicago, in one of the loneliest rice paddies in the world? Like he said, as far as the eye could see, there was not another human being. It was only the beautiful snow-capped Himalayas in the distance and the beautiful green rice paddies full of mud. And I knew there was somebody behind me, and the quick glance that I had gotten, I knew it was a renunciate, what they call sadhus in India. And, he'd been living outdoors. His skin was dark, and from the quick glance I got, I was certain it was a sadhu. They're all over India, So I knew there was no danger. And I knew that when we got to the other side of the rice paddies, where it was that I would be able to see who was sharing my umbrella, and he would thank me, namaste, and wish me well, give me his blessing. It's always good to get the blessing of a sadhu. And like he said, when I looked into his face and saw who it was, I was beyond blown away. And I was just, it was probably one of the biggest miracles that ever happened in my life. Because I did go to India a year later. But because in that era was no cell phones or computers, I knew that the possibility of finding monk Radhanath Swami was like finding a needle in a haystack. I mean, what are the chances in a subcontinent of 1 billion people of finding one person? I had no idea whether he was in North India, South India, the Himalayas. I had no idea. So I figured I would just do my travels, and I really didn't think I'd find him. So that wasn't even in part of my thought process or my equation. But when I did, it was beyond amazing to me. To this day, when I read that chapter in his book, and I've read it many times, I still find it amazing. And it was as clear as it was just yesterday, even when it was 39 years ago. We didn't part so quickly. We actually decided to, we caught up, and he asked me if I would become a sadhu and join him, Sadhu, I looked at him. He had no clothes, no possessions, no bath, no shower. I didn't know how to live like a sadhu. And I wasn't quite sure how to jump through the windows of trains yet. But he said, don't worry, I'll teach you everything you need to know. So he said, tomorrow we'll leave us. So he says, I'll come to he came to my house where I was staying. And I was staying in a hut that I'd rented, with a water buffalo underneath from a peasant family. And there was some things going on there that he took one look at it. There was women there, and there was rock music, and there was the smell of hashish and marijuana. He looked at me now, And so I traveled with him as a sadhu, going through the same unbelievable experiences, the pain, in the monsoon, in the heat of India, traveling like, even in an air-conditioned thing, you would be uncomfortable. But traveling like we did was unbelievable. I couldn't do it now. You have to be young, and like at that age, you don't look at it as a hardship, but as an experience. Laying underneath the wooden bench with people throwing garbage on you. Oh my God, I'm so happy. I'd rather be here than anywhere in the world. And you have to trust and love somebody in order to follow them into that lifestyle. I mean, most of us wouldn't do such a thing. So we did travel like that, and eventually I got to enjoy it and to learn how. And I think you should explain about the time when we couldn't get back on the train. That was an amazing, for me, I hadn't yet been exposed to the real spiritual India, I was sort of a hippie tourist, but I hadn't yet experienced the hardcore tourism.
So Gary, he lived in Israel for almost a year. Worked on kibbutzes, and there was a bus called the Magic Bus that went from Amsterdam to...
From London to New Delhi. It was a hippie bus service. And I had enough money that I got on it in Istanbul. So I had a bus that took me all the way to India. It took a month. It wasn't necessarily luxurious, but compared to the way he went, I had the safety of a roof of the shelter of a bus and other traveling companions. And so I did make it to India. But I had no idea what was in store for me when I got there. And, he taught me the ropes.
So I'm just going to tell one more story. I think it's getting late, yes? I don't... It's fine? Okay. So, I heard a message from one sadhu that there was a pilgrimage in the Himalayas of Kashmir, and if anyone goes there, their spiritual desires will be fulfilled. So I told Gary, this is where we're going. This was long distance. And we went to Patna, and I introduced him to some old sadhu friends I knew. They were like in their 90s. And then we went to Varanasi. And in Varanasi, I went to a temple of Shiva called Kashi Vishwanath, and I prayed from my heart of hearts, Lord Shiva, please show me my path. I'm learning so much from so many people, but what is my path? And there in Kashi Vishwanath, I had a feeling as I was praying to Shiva, really a feeling like my path was going to be revealed. And I understood it's going to be in Amarnath, in this cave in the Himalayas where the pilgrimage is going to. It's a temple of Shiva. So Gary and I jumped through a window of a third-class train, and this was as crowded as they get. And they're all as crowded as you can get, but this was really overcrowded as you get. And it was so hot. It was the monsoons, really hot, really humid, and there was no place to sit, and no water, and no food, and the air was recycled by about 300 people. A massive storm came down of rain, and it flooded the field that we were in, and the train couldn't move for 25 hours, and no one could get out because it was like we were in a lake, and it was all mud because it was fields, and all the snakes live in the ground, and when it gets flooded like that, they all come to the top and they're all swimming around, and nobody was going to go out there. So we were all like this, waiting for it to move. We were all already there for about 10 hours, right? And then another 25 hours. And finally, no food, no water, and what the bathroom, we fight a war. And finally, the whistle blew. And we heard the steam engine. It was like the ultimate traffic jam. If you think LA traffic jams are difficult, please remember this story. And we went for a few more hours, and then finally it stopped at a station. And Gary and I thought, we're going to breathe air, we're going to find some water, and we're going to move our limbs. And it was with great struggle we climbed out a window just to get to the window. And we walked around and we breathed actually fresh air. And then we drank a lot of water from a local hand pump, remember? And then we went to get back in the train. The whistle blew, it started moving. We jumped through a window and bounced off a wall of human flesh. We jumped in another window, but we couldn't get in. The train was gone. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. After a few minutes, the railway platform was deserted. And Gary asked, "Where are we?" I said, "I don't know." We were stranded in this place. And then we saw some little sadhus sitting around a little fire. And I walked up to one of them. And he stood up, one holy man. And I asked, "Where am I?" Which was a logical question. He said, "This is Mathura, Lord Krishna's birthplace. Today is Janamastami, Lord Krishna's birthday. Come to the festival with me. We'll go to his birth site." So he took Gary and I to that place, and there was about 1 million people there, you remember? It's like a big railway compartment. But they were dancing, and they were having lectures, and they were throwing colors on each other, and they were singing, and they were so many things happening. It was really a festival of inspiration and devotion. It was thrilling to watch it. And some very mysterious things happened after that. But I heard about a place called Brindaban, and somehow or other that name just attracted me, and I said to Gary, I want to walk to this place alone and come and meet me there tomorrow. So I went to a village called Brindaban, about 8 miles away from where we were, and I spent a day just walking around little forests there. And the next day Gary came, and we met, which was amazing, because it was Krishna's birthday, both Mathura and Brindaban were swarming with people, and I was just going into forests. And Gary said, let's go to the Himalayas, there's too many people here. I said, I want to stay a couple days, but I'll meet you under a clock tower on the bank of the Ganges in a town called Haridwar in the Himalayan foothills. I'll meet you there in 4 days at noon. So he said, all right, I want to go to a quiet place. I don't want to stay here. I said, I just want to stay a couple days. So it was for certain I was going to see him under that clock tower at noon, and then we were going to go to that cave in Kashmir to see Lord Shiva. After 3 days there, 2.5 days, I was supposed to leave the next morning and get my third-class train. I was sleeping on the bank of the river Yamuna. When I rose that morning, I couldn't move. My body was burning. I was nauseous and sick. Never been so sick in my life. And I had some pretty serious bouts of all kinds of stuff in the Middle East, but I was never move. I was just laying on that dusty riverbank, burning with fever. And hours passed. Vultures were circling overhead, and I didn't know what to do. I was so sick. And finally a farmer came by and saw me laying there with vultures ready to eat me, and he just picked me up like a bale of hay and threw me in the back of an ox cart and took me to a charitable hospital. And I'm not going to go into details, but you can read the book if you like. But the doctors and the nurses in that charitable hospital were hardly any more hospitable than the vultures that I had just been with the day before. Anyways, I had typhoid fever, very severe. And finally, the doctor, he was just giving me glucose water because he couldn't afford to give me medicine because I had no money. And when I finally got a little better, he said, you have to stay for at least a month. If you travel the way you travel, you'll die. So I was just thinking about poor Gary. He's sitting under that clock tower. He doesn't know anything about this life except what I was teaching him. And he was waiting for me. And I took him away from all of his friends. And I took him away from all his possessions. And I took him away from all his money. And they worship God in the form of Krishna and his feminine aspect, Radha. The feminine aspect of God is the divine, eternal, absolute source of forgiveness, compassion, and love. And everybody there was just Radhe Radhe, worshiping this beautiful goddess Radha to awaken their love. And it was so beautiful. And it was there that I met my guru about 6 months later, Srila Prabhupada, whose compassion, whose wisdom overwhelmed me. And I wanted to give my life to share what I was receiving from him and from this beautiful place of Vrindavan. And I decided to never leave there for the rest of my life. And I was just living on the bank of a river with no possessions. It was such a beautiful life, sleeping under different trees is going out and begging for a piece of roti or a piece of dry bread once a day. It was the life. Everything I wanted and more, because there was such inner fulfillment. Just aspiring for that love and gradually experiencing little at a time, more and more of that love within. And there I learned, because in Vrindavan the main meditation is japa and kirtan, chanting mantra. The mind, man means the mind, and tra means to free the mind of all suffering and anxiety by connecting our mind with the divinity within us, with the love of God, which I found to be the very essence of every great spiritual tradition I learned from. I learned in Vrindavan that the essence of real spirituality is not to be a Hindu or a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian or a Jain or a Zoroastrian or a Sikh or anything else. It's to love God, to access that divinity of love within us and be an instrument of that love in our life. And I believe that so much. And I was finding that and experiencing that so much through chanting God's names. And this mantra that Rasikananda is the main mantra of Vrindavan, which has been chanted there for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And many other mantras and names of God are chanted. I'll never forget, one day, can I speak a few more minutes?
Please.
One day I was sitting on the bank of the Jamuna in Vrindavan with these old ancient temple bells ringing behind me and these men with old turbans and robes herding cows and goats and buffaloes and little kids playing cricket and ladies with beautiful saris carrying clay pots of water on their head. It was such another world. It was so beautiful. And then one very traditional elderly sadhu sat next to me. And he said to me, this is not in the book. I put it there, but the editor took it out. He sat right next to me. And he just looked like the most traditional, cultural symbol of ancient India. And he said, I want to give you something that has stimulated my love for Krishna so deeply. And then we started talking about the gopis, right? The gopis are simple cowherd damsels who showed the highest levels of ecstatic love for God, for Krishna. And he said, I'm going to give you something that has helped me to understand what is the gopis' love for Krishna. And he gave me a little piece of paper that was folded up. And then he walked away. And I was expecting something in Sanskrit that I wasn't going to be able to read. Or some ancient hymn from the Vedas. I couldn't believe what I saw when I opened it. It was the prayers of St. Francis of Assisi. That prayer, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hate, let me sow love. And I read through it. And I had read this so many times before when I was in Europe and Italy and going to monasteries and cathedrals. But this time when I read it, it had an experience that I never had before. I really felt a connection, a deep connection with St. Francis, with all the saints of all the traditions. And I was thinking, yes, the gopis' love for Krishna, this is going to help me. That was a beautiful experience. The essence, seeking the essence. And my guru, Srila Prabhupada, he showered such kindness and affection, such wisdom. Anyways, he left after some days, and I was sleeping on the bank of the Jamuna, determined to stay the rest of my life, but my visa ran out, and that's a whole story. The police were looking for me, the CID was looking for me, and they were hunting me down, and I couldn't get out of the country because then they would arrest me for not having a valid visa. And if I stayed in, I was going to get arrested because they were hunting me, and it's a long story, but ultimately a dog who had rabies saved my life.
Wow.
If you want to know the details, you could read the book. And somehow or other I got a legal entry because of that. I mean, I got a legal visa to get treatment for what the disease I had, and then because I got rabies. It's a long story, but it's very interesting. And I went to Nepal, and I wrote to my parents, because please, this is a major part of the book, is my parents. I told them I'd be back in 2.5 months for the next semester of college. And they loved me, and they worried about me, and Gary can tell. He knew my mother and father so well, and I know his mother and father so well. In fact, recently I was with Gary's mother and father, Irv and Bernice. And Gary gave them the journey home, and they read it. Along with his uncle Ralph. And I asked his mother, "Did you like the book?" And she turned to me with great conviction and said, "How could I not? It's all about my son." That's the nicest thing anybody ever said about it. So anyways, my poor parents, they worried about me like anything when I didn't call in time when I was in college, if I was late coming home at night. And here I was. And 2 months went by, and 3 months went by, and 4 months went by, and they heard nothing from me, and they were helpless. They had no idea where I was, what was happening. College already started without me. And then after over 4 months, they finally got a letter that stated, "I'm no longer with Gary." Ultimately, I had to leave Nepal, and I was living in a place called Pokhara Valley, which is, in those days, it was a very isolated, desolate place that only trekkers going to the peaks of the Himalayas would go to. And I heard it was one of the most beautiful places on earth, the Annapurna mountain range of the Himalayas. Beautiful place. And I used to, from sunrise to sunset, I went into this lake on a little rowboat. And the boat was a hollowed out tree trunk with a little oar. And I went there, and from sunrise to sunset, I just chanted Krishna's names and Radha's names and studied Bhagavad Gita and prayed. It was beautiful. And I found a cave. This was a fantastic little cave. How I found it, I was walking through a jungle, and there was just a little dirt road, and I was just crossed it, and I heard the sound of a river, and I love to sleep on the banks of rivers, so I started climbing down a mountain to try to get to the river, and on the way, it became a steep cliff, and I couldn't climb down any longer, and I looked up, and there was a cave in the wall of the cliff. And I made that my home, and every day I went to the lake, and then came back to the cave at night. The next day I had to leave. My visa was over. Just transit in India to Delhi, and then I had to leave the country. So I was walking back that last time, and I just crossed this one little road in the middle of nowhere. It was miles and miles from any town. I started climbing down the cliff. I put one leg down, and a bus zoomed by. And suddenly, the bus stopped, maybe 50 yards ahead of me, slammed on its brakes and stopped. And I heard some screeching sound. And I turned around, and I didn't know what was going on. I was just kind of looking, halfway, one foot going down the cliff and one foot on the top of the cliff. And then I saw a form of something running toward me. And I was thinking, you know, there's a lot of robbers and thieves in India called dacoits. And I was thinking, this guy must see some Western guy and all alone in the wilderness. He's going to rob me. So I just stood there. And it was dark. He was coming closer, closer, closer. I'm wondering, what is going on here? Then he came a little closer. And I saw it was Gary.
Can't get rid of me.
You can tell the rest.
Have you, many of you ever been to India? Okay. In India, the buses, even to this day, they have a, you know, because in the country there's no regular bus stops, when you want to stop, there's a rope that you pull on, and it goes to the front, to where the driver is, and causes the bus to stop. And I was just kind of dozing off because my friend and I were going to the Himalayas to go trekking. Trekking means backpacking. I wanted to go to the base of Mount Everest, you know, biggest mountain in the world. And as I was kind of resting my head on the seat, you know, the dirt roads was jolting me a bit. And I happened to look out the window. As that moment, I saw him, he was about to go down to his cave.
The lights of the bus flashed.
The lights of the bus flashed on his figure, and I go, my God, that's Monk. Remember, the last I'd seen him, he didn't show up at our appointed place. He had typhoid fever. I had no way of knowing it. So, many months had passed. Maybe it was 6 months, 8 months.
Oh my God.
I don't remember.
It's almost a year.
Almost a year. I'd been wandering around India and, you know, experiencing my own journey. And I said it's to my traveling companion, ooh, that's a whole story, but somebody that Monk and I had known, Radhanath and I had known back home. I'd met him in Delhi and by coincidence, and we were going to the Himalayas, and I saw his figure by the light of the bus about to disappear off that road to God knows where, to what looked like a jungle. And I pulled the thing and I told the bus driver, and he was amazed. You're getting off here? There's no villages. There's no homes. Where could this crazy possibly go? You know? And I can hear the Indian people talking to themselves. These guys are crazy.
That's what they said us in America, too. They told us.
That's right. So I pulled the thing, and we got off, grabbed our little backpack, and off we went, and was reunited with Radhanath again. After all that time, he had to leave the next day because he was going back to America. And you know, he actually had $250, which to me was amazing. And he was still living in a cave, still, you know, drinking water he got from the creek, and with virtually no food. And I'm thinking, you got $250. You can live a little bit, tiny bit better than this, you know. It was great. And we spent the whole night catching up.
I remember telling him, because that never crossed my mind that I could spend money again. It just didn't cross my mind. I just, you know, put it in my pack for the ticket. And when he said that, it was like an awakening. I said to Gary, I forgot how to spend money. I never spent a penny of it. Go on, please.
Well, we talked all night, and then the next day he had to leave for his trip back to America. And that's when we parted ways again. Myself, I stayed longer in Nepal. I did the trek. I hitchhiked all the way back from India to Europe. Spent 2 years in Africa, a year in South America. I was gone for a total of 5 years on my own journey. But that was the last I saw of him for 18 years.
We had no communication. We had no idea where each other went.
Wow. So The story of how we met again is quite amazing, but you'll probably have to read the book for that because we're definitely running out of time, unless you want to hear it.
Anyways, I'm a Swami. Gary's a physical bodybuilding trainer at the Malibu gym. So after 18 years, this was what we learned about each other when we, a very inconceivable way in which we met again. And I remember he looked at me and I looked at him, and I had a shaved head now, and he had nice short hair, and I was just a skinny little Swami, and he was a Malibu bodybuilder.
Personal trainer.
Whatever you call it. And I remember when we looked at each other, I saw in his eyes, what do we have in common? And I looked at him, and he saw in my eyes, what do we have in common? After 18 years of no communication. And we sat and talked all night in Malibu Beach at his aunt and uncle's house. And I remember Gary asked me, he said, how could we still be friends when we have nothing in common? He said, my whole life is to teach people that if you have a strong, beautiful, healthy body, you're going to be happy. And your whole life is to teach people that they're not a body. That the body's just a shell, that they're a soul. So I remember saying to, because we spoke all night and it was a very intimate talk. We just caught up on 18 years of all we did. And at the very end of the night, he said this to me. And I said, Gary, what I learned from my guru and from my discoveries is that the body is a temple of God. And the body is a sacred place. So you teach people how to keep their temple really nice, and I'll try to teach them what to do inside. And we'll be a team. And Gary said, yes, we'll be a team. We're together again. And we've been a team ever since.
An unlikely friendship. And a sequel is I over the last 7 years, every 5 of them, I've gone back to India to visit him. And he has such a beautiful temple there. He has such wonderful devotees. For those of you who know, devotees are, his congregation are called devotees. And they're the best people on the planet. I mean, these people are the most loving, kind people, and they've accepted me. You know, at first they accepted me. I know why they accepted me. You'll come home and say, you know what, Gary, you were right. These are the best people you could ever hope to meet. So we don't have to lose each other again now for any more years, because there are cell phones and there are instant messages, and even Radhanath has a computer. So it's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful friendship. And his book is amazing. If you haven't read it, you all should. It's